the missile ready for launch into Canberra, and the Russians are coming, not. Coming up on today's Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report for the 24th of April. I'm Elisa Barwick. Joining me today is Citizens Party Research Director and Victorian Senate candidate, Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks, Lisa.
And on today's show, we're going to be discussing the biggest threat to the power elite in our nation's capital.
And they should be terrified.
And then we're going to discuss the security threats that are being drummed up. And lo and behold, this time it's not China, it's Russia. And why it's a farce as usual.
Yep. Go back to the 1960s staple. Russians are coming.
So, stay tuned for the whole show today. We've got plenty of interesting developments, of course, with the election not too far off. Please help to share this message as widely as you can. Please hit the like button, put a comment below, circulate the show on social media to get it around. And if you can donate, please consider doing so, even if you have already. Obviously, we've still got the next 2 weeks of the campaign to really, even though people are voting already in record numbers, and we need to be out at the pre-polling booths, and there's a lot to do and achieve in those next couple of weeks.
Yep. And like we usually say, with the please add your comments below, and we will reply to them as we can. But the feedback is very valuable. We need to really use all the social media we can get, Elisa, and our show is very important for that. That's why you need to help us get it around. Yep.
So put plugs in for us wherever you can on your Facebook page or whatever social media you use. All right, now, before we get into the main topics, Robbie, one note at least on the Pope's death, which happened on Easter Monday.
Yeah, we did wonder if we could get away without commenting on it because we felt it hasn't been getting enough coverage, Elisa. But anyway, that's tongue-in-cheek. It is a significant event, but we just wanted to highlight one part of the Pope's tenure, Pope Francis's tenure, which came pretty early on when he issued this paper called Evangelii Gaudium.
In 2013.
So it was 12 years ago, where he was one of the first significant people in the world to call time, if you will, but launch a full-blown attack on neoliberalism, what neoliberalism had done to the world economy and especially the Western economies. And it was very, very important. And of course, if you're a regular viewer of this show, you know that this is one of our themes. What neoliberalism basically did, here's one way to think about it. It was a deliberate ideology to dismantle the power of government, representative government, that protects you from unbridled corporate power. And by dismantling the power of government, we just got unbridled corporate power. And people getting crushed under that, and he called that out.
Well, he was very explicit about that. He was just re-looking at it because he said, look, we've set up this autonomy of the marketplace, and we've displaced the states, the power of the state that looks after the common good, and creating, therefore, what he called a new tyranny. So very apt now when you look back. Everything that he said and the way that he put it exactly is what has come to pass. Yeah,
exactly. Well, and it was just people were already seeing it. It's just he was probably the first very significant global figure to call it out. Now it's the backlash is huge. I mean, our success as a party in impacting debates in Parliament is because of the backlash. People understanding what we're saying. We've got to go back to where we went wrong, right? To the policies that work, things like a national bank. Because without a national bank, the big four private banks are an oligopoly, a cartel, and they have total say over the economy. They direct the economy. And you, the voter, even if you vote people into government, that government has no power to direct the economy because the banks direct the economy.
Yeah, we've got to have those institutions and those structures.
Exactly.
That's what we're going to be talking about, in fact, in our first segment. Restoring those institutions and those capabilities that are vital, because otherwise the elected MPs can't don't have the power and the strength to deploy the tools at their avail. So that's it into our first topic, the missile ready for launch into Canberra. Now, Robbie, you have been this week on Tuesday at our, we had an entire day as a campaign launch for our national campaigns with a particular focus on our star candidate in New South Wales, Andy Schmulo, who we're going to send into Canberra, hopefully to break up all manner of power structures that have overridden the democratic power structures that protect the common good. So he made a couple of speeches. We had a lunchtime event with media availability, and we had an evening event as well in which he gave the keynote address. But fill the viewers in on more of the colour of what happened on Tuesday.
Well, it was quite ambitious by the party because we did three big events in one day. One was an outside event at the Chatswood Mall. We had a marquee set up at the Chatswood Mall, handing out Andy's How to Vote cards to the passers-by, and that was the day that pre-polling started. So we had a lot of people in the mall doing that. We had a lunch at for the media at Chatswood, at a restaurant there, and then in the evening we had the event at the Hilton Hotel, which was our main event for the day. And look, we're calling this the missile ready for launch into Canberra because you cannot understate the power of Dr. Andy Schmulo. And we're going to play his speech to the launch. I really want people to see this. And he starts off, and I was just going to reference it, I don't want to give all the detail, but he starts off explaining why he's so confident to take on these institutions and the politicians who protect them. And it goes to just how well prepared he is. He is a phenomenal researcher. He has a doctorate in law. He was taught the rigour of researching. So when he goes to inquiries, he's better prepared than anybody else. And that's what gives him, when he starts talking and he's rattling off those details of the crimes of the financial institutions, he is unbelievably formidable, right? And we need this guy. Australia needs this guy in Parliament, right? He is more qualified than anybody else in there, and he displays it a million times. He just happened to do a couple of interviews in the lead up to this event. He was on YouTube. He was on Martin North's program again, and he was on Adam Stokes' channel. Those are getting big views. Everyone who comes across Andy Schmulo is awestruck by his cut through. I'm getting calls all the time. I got a call yesterday out of the blue from a lady I hadn't spoken to for about 4 years, who had sort of, drifted away from our party because she felt that, other parties were it was a particular concern she had, which I knew was a short-term thing and wouldn't last the distance. But she called me up because she's got my number and she'd just been watching his interview, right? And she called him a missile. People on the comments under these YouTube channels are calling him a missile, or someone's compared him to Batman, and that's a good analogy because the corruption he's describing. This is Gotham City, right? And he's the Batman, and he has all the backup in the world from us, right? Because the reason he's our candidate and the reason we asked him to be our candidate is because he expresses exactly what we've been trying to get through the public for years, right? And we don't just, he's the guy I also compare Andy to the Terminator with that vision where he can see everything, all the threats happening at once, right?
All the background information comes up.
Bang, 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 zero in on it. We're the ones that have come up with these solutions, like the public bank, to be able to follow through. And when you say you put in regulations against the banks, but follow through with a public bank so it smashes their power, right? And the combining of the two makes for a formidable team. But we've got to get him in there, and this is the real challenge. And as I said, we won't play the whole event. We don't have time. But as I said to the event, word of mouth is crucial, right? And your role as the viewer, anyone you know in New South Wales, you make sure they watch Andy And because this was a closed event, what you're about to watch is not available yet on YouTube. So let's just play Andy's video, and you can see the power of his delivery at our national launch.
Thank you, Robbie, and a very good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for being here on a weeknight. Thank you so much for giving of your time. Thank you so much for taking time out of your family time to be here. It's very much appreciated. You know, over the last 2 years, I've been asked to make submissions and give evidence to, on about a dozen occasions, to parliamentary and Senate inquiries. And when I've given evidence to parliamentary inquiries and when I've made submissions to Senate and parliamentary inquiries, the evidence that I give and the submissions that I make are adopted either almost in their entirety or they are adopted in their entirety. So I put forward solutions and those solutions are adopted. They're adopted because I bring to that process rigorous research, and I'm very grateful that I'm able to do rigorous research thanks to the opportunity that I had to do a PhD at the University of Melbourne. I did my PhD at the University of Melbourne's Law School. In 2014, the University of Melbourne's Law School was judged number 5 in the world. Best law schools in the world were judged Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford, Yale, Melbourne. And I came to Melbourne's law school and I thought I was pretty crash hot. I thought I knew what I was doing. I was unusual in that I came to do a PhD and I had some publications under my belt. And what I discovered when I did my PhD is how little I knew, not about the topic, that's a given, but how little I knew about excellent, rigorous, bulletproof scholarship. Melbourne University caned me. Melbourne University schooled me. Melbourne University learned me. Melbourne University humbled me. And I take my hat off to that great Australian institution. And I take my hat off to the fact that I was given the opportunity to study there under scholarships funded by the Australian government. Thank you. Thank you to you. Thank you. And so one of the things I've discovered is you can say anything you like in a parliamentary submission, and I say anything I like. I lash firms like PwC, as long as you can back it up, right? So I've made submissions to Parliament that I know firms like KPMG and PwC and McKinsey's have set aside teams of people to go through my submissions line by line, word for word, looking for a place where they can trip me up. I know that because they've done it to my colleagues. I have a fantastic colleague at the University of Wollongong. She kind of got duped into making a submission along with a guy at Macquarie University. I won't mention his name, I'll just call him Dickhead. Dickhead's got an ego that's a lot bigger than his brain. And Dickhead made a submission about KPMG and he used ChatGPT, he used generative AI to write parts of his submission. I can't tell you the stuff I want to do to students when I catch them doing that. Like if it was up to me, I'd go back to corporal punishment. I cannot stand cheaters. I cannot stand cheaters. This guy is an emeritus professor and he used ChatGPT. What are you? Brain damaged? Or worse, lazy? Don't do your own research, man. So he used ChatGPT, and ChatGPT being artificial but not that intelligent, although it's caught up now, we're redundant as humans. ChatGPT invented case scenarios. KPMG had a team of people go through that submission. They figured out that these were invented case scenarios, and they wailed to Parliament. They complained that it was fabricated research and it was fraudulent and how dare they do this, and they'd brought it in under parliamentary privilege and it's an abuse of parliamentary privilege and it's brought the whole parliamentary inquiry into disrepute, all of which was true. All of which was true. All of which was a valid argument, except for the fact that it was an argument made by KPMG, the same firm that was paid millions of dollars to write a report for the National Health and Medical Research Council. And it was discovered in that report that they'd written for the National Health and Medical Research Council, a report that they were paid millions of dollars for, that there were footnotes in that report to documents that didn't exist. There's only one explanation. They used ChatGPT. Like, this is how I catch students when they cheat. I check the footnotes. And if I come across a journal article that doesn't exist, well, it's not a typo error, right? You're not mistakenly pressing the keyboard 260 times. Shmulo, Andy, financial regulation in Upper Volta, Journal of Financial Regulation. You're not going to do that many typos and it all comes out perfectly, right? That's not how typos work. So where does a journal article come from that doesn't exist? ChatGPT. So KPMG, the same firm that wailed like stuck pigs about the use of ChatGPT in a submission that criticized them, that same firm had used ChatGPT to write a report that they were paid millions of dollars for the National Health and Medical Research Council. That's why these guys need to be put to the lash. But be that as it may, if they did it with my colleague and her colleague, Dickhead, if they did it with their submission, they did it with my submission. Because I said much worse things about KPMG, and I said terrible things about McKinsey's. I said McKinsey's has killed more people in America than General Motors, the Remington Rifle Company, and Ford put together. 700,000 people have died in the United States because of opioid overdoses, because of OxyContin. McKinsey's paid $1 billion fine for turbocharging the opioid epidemic by showing Purdue Pharmaceutical how to target demographics that were most likely to get addicted to their drugs. Obscene behavior. And I called them out for that, and there's no ways they didn't check it and go, oh, he can't say this about, oh wait, he's quoted the New York Times. Oh, he's quoted the New York Times. Yeah, I suppose he can say it. So one of the things I realized is you can move the dial if you bring research that is rigorous, vigorous, robust, and bulletproof. And I'm sorry to say that there are a lot of people in Parliament who don't do that. They sit there like guppies, just being fed BS by whoever is appearing before them. And I look at this and I go, well, thank God I'm appearing next. And I go and I sit before them and I go, what you've just heard from the Property Council, which can be summarised as, it's all too hard, rubbish. They are invested in you thinking that because that's how they make their money. Or the evidence that you heard 10 minutes ago from Coles and Woolworths, that there's no point in breaking them up because they bring economies of scale. Yeah, they do bring economies of scale. But the evidence shows that the benefit from economies of scale is this much, and the disbenefit from having 2 supermarkets and a duopoly is this much. So what you lose with the economies of scale, you'll gain tenfold in the competition. And that was proven correct 6 months later when the ACCC issued their report and they said, our supermarkets, Coles and Woolworths, are the most profitable in the world. And this is where I come to my first point, the cost of living crisis. We talk about a cost of living crisis, and I'm concerned about the use of the word crisis because crisis makes it sound like it's just in the here and now, it'll be okay tomorrow. Nah. Tomorrow, it's going to be worse. This isn't going to get fixed by some magic performed by the fairies at the bottom of the garden. This is going to get worse. Cost of living crisis, the housing crisis, the control of our parliament by big corporations, all of that stuff, all of those trends are not towards improvement, they are towards deterioration. So we've got to do something about it, right? We've got to put a stop to it. And to put a stop to it, you need to go down, worm your way down and find what is the root cause. Where does it begin? Where do these problems start? Can I put this down? No.
No, let me try and move the thing.
All of these problems, let me tell you something, all of these problems are soluble. All of these problems can be fixed. All of these problems have appeared elsewhere in the world at other times, and they have been fixed. The notion that we can't fix them, bullshit. And what we are sold is this idea, the curtains are on fire, and everybody's running around going, what do we do? Let's have a commission of inquiry. Or let's have another task force. Let's not rush into anything because it might disrupt economies of scale. Or hang on a minute, we don't want to disrupt the economy. How about you just get a fire extinguisher and put the fire out? How about if you see the emperor walking past and you can see his tinkle in the wind, instead of discussing whether you like what he's wearing, how about the emperor has no clothes? How about getting down to the root cause? And what is the root cause? Our parliament is sovereign, so why is our parliament not fixing these problems? Our parliament has the power to fix these problems, so why is it not fixing these problems? And these problems can be fixed. We have a supermarket duopoly. They are the most profitable supermarkets in the world. Why? Because they have no competition. Therein lies the solution. I'll say it again. They have no competition. What's the solution? Competition. It's not rocket surgery. So why does Parliament not enact competition? Why does Parliament not ensure that the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission can break up Coles and Woolworths? Because they are too scared to take on major party political donors. That's where the blockage lies. That's why the two major parties, the Liberal Party and the Diet Liberal Party, fewer calories, same great liberal taste, two sides to the same coin, two cheeks to the same arse. That's why they don't do anything, because they're going, well, we know the problem is a duopoly with Coles and Woolworths. We know that the problem would be fixed by breaking up Coles and Woolworths, but then we'll lose party political donations. And if we lose the party political donations, those party political donations will go to the opposition, and then we'll lose the election. So the Liberal Party and the Diet Liberal Party are locked in this death grip. This death grip of we dare not do anything radical because the party political donations will go to the other side, and then we'll lose the election. And this is real, ladies and gentlemen. Why do we struggle to fight elections? Why are we a small party? Why do we struggle to get our message heard? Because we can't put up $1 million billboards. You want to fight an election? You want to win an election? It costs money. $260 million. $260 million is how much the Liberal Party and the Diet Liberal Party have raised from party political donations in the last 10 years. So you want to go up against the Liberals and the Labour Party? Over a 10-year period, you're going to need $130 million. If you don't have 130, if you have 125 million, that's the difference between the other side winning and you losing. So don't rock the boat. Don't rock the boat with the supermarkets. Don't rock the boat with the banks. Don't rock the boat with Qantas. Don't rock the boat with the big consulting firms. Don't rock the boat. So people are angry. People are saying, mate, I can't afford to feed myself. I can't afford to feed my family. Look at the cost of groceries. But we can't afford to live anymore. And the government rolls in and goes, we'll give you a sugar hit. We'll give you a subsidy, or we'll give you a small check for your electricity, or we'll give you we'll give you a carrot today. Where's the carrot coming from? Tax. That's why we're one of the highest taxed countries in the world. We'll give you a sugar hit from tax, and because we give you a sugar hit from tax, like mugs, you'll take it and you'll vote for us, and then for the next 3 months you'll be okay, but the next 3 years things are going to get worse. And in 3 years' time, we will be back here saying the exact same things, except we'll be even poorer. We'll have struggled even more. We'll have had even more fat cut from the bone. So how do you break this logjam? You get into Parliament without donations from big corporations. Because once you've got that shackle removed, they've got nothing on you. I won't take corporate donations. This party won't take corporate donations. To be fair, I don't think any corporation would be stupid enough to donate to me. Because they know what I'd do with the money. Buy a bigger stick to beat them harder. I'm not up for it, man. I'm not up for being bought off. I've got a great job. I earn pretty much what I would earn if I went to the Senate. I get much better superannuation in the job that I'm in. I've just won a 3-year research grant, which means I don't need to do any lecturing for the next 3 years. Happy days for me. I'm willing to give that up, not to be enriched, but to make a change. And I am absolutely not available to be purchased. It is beneath my dignity. Plus, I have to say, I do get this kind of weird fetish pleasure out of kicking the crap out of these people, out of watching them squirm and cry and whinge and whine and shrivel into themselves like the evil little cockroaches that they are. And it's not that hard. It's not that hard. Like, you know, one of our major policy platforms is a people's bank. And so I've had some critics say to me, a people's bank, a government-owned bank, do you know how many times government-owned banks have gone bankrupt? I go, no. Is it as many times as private banks have gone bankrupt? Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, Goldman Sachs, Halifax Bank of Scotland, Royal Bank of Scotland, Northern Rock, Bank West. Would you like me to continue? Come with the research, man. Come with the facts, and then take me on. I'm ready for you. Coles and Woolworths. You'll lose the economies of scale. I'm sure we'll lose the economies of scale. But what we'll also lose is a supermarket duopoly where, compared to the United States, where the average return on equity for supermarkets in the United States, 1.4%. Coles, 34%. Coles's return on equity is 3 times higher than our banking industry, and our banking industry has the highest return on equity of any banking industry in the world. And what do banks make? Nothing. They don't make anything. They don't have factories. They don't produce anything. They don't build anything. They don't design anything. They don't create software. They don't create intellectual property. So where do they get their money? They get their money from everybody else making and designing and building, which is why the Productivity Commission has said that there have been no real wage increases in Australia in the last 15 years. Banks have sucked it out of the economy. Productivity Commission said in 2019 our banks are a cozy 4-bank oligopoly. 4 of them got the whole of the market. There's a little bit of competition between them. It's mainly churning. People are pissed off with one of the big 4 going to another one of the big 4, while people at that big 4 move in the opposite direction. It's meaningless. It's a meaningless movement. And the bank regulator will not allow new competition. I worked for APRA. I worked for the bank regulator. I said at the time, I reckon there are religious cults less steeped in groupthink than the bank regulator. I was there on a 4-month contract. After 2 months, they said, we're sacking you. So I said, why is that? They said, you asked too many questions. I went, really? Why? Why are you scared of questions? 3, 4, 5 years later, the Treasury did a capability review under Graham Samuel of the bank regulator. What did he find? A regulator deeply steeped in groupthink, with chronically underperforming middle management, promoted on a patronage-based system of promotion, which is code for, if you want to get promoted at APRA, the better you kiss ass, the higher will be the asses that you kiss. And as a result, our big 4 banks have gone from 60% control of the market, 70, 80% today. Vampire squid. So here's a solution. You get the bank regulator in front of you and you go, here are testimonials from 10 small banks who've said that you've made their lives hell trying to get a banking license. Oh, well, you know, it's all right. No, I don't want to hear your excuses. You got 6 months to grant these licenses, or a lot of you are sacked. Then watch them run around doing their jobs. ASIC. How many times per day do I get contacted by victims of bank fraud? I've lost my house, I've lost my livelihood, I've lost everything, I've been defrauded by my bank. ASIC does nothing. Yeah, that's what ASIC does, nothing. And it's been confirmed. 2014 Senate inquiry, 2014 Financial System inquiry, 2015 Treasury Capability Review, 2019 Hayne Royal Commission, 2024 Senate inquiry, 5 for 5. How many times do we have to have an inquiry into ASIC that says ASIC doesn't do its job before we go, you know what? I think maybe ASIC doesn't do its job. So here's a solution. Cut them up. Slice them up, slice them, dice them, shut them down, establish a regulator that does the job of protecting the public against banks that act like apex parasites. Six years ago, the Hayne Royal Commission found that one of the most egregious practices in our financial industry was charging fees to the dead. We were shocked beyond belief. Charging fees to the dead. Pilfering from corpses. This is what you people have become, you scum. We were shocked, we were disgusted. We thought this cannot possibly be. 6 years later, 2024, November last year, ANZ, they're still doing it. They're still doing it, and the executives are not in jail. But be a bank teller and steal $20 and you will go to jail. Where is the justice in that? So we've got a piece of legislation, the Financial Accountability Regime Act. I did an analysis of that for Parliament. I showed Parliament how Treasury has drafted that legislation so as to look like you can hold bank executives accountable, but you actually can't. The legislation was fixed. This is in the Sydney Morning Herald, right? These are reports in the Sydney Morning Herald written by Rachel Clun. 23rd of November 2022, look it up. Her article was entitled $1 Million Fines Back for Bankers. A week later, on the 3rd of December 2022, she published an article called Deal or No Deal. 7 days it took for the Australian Banking Association to call up the Deputy Treasurer, the Assistant Treasurer, and go, nah, you don't hold our members accountable. Take that stuff. Those recommendations by that troublemaker Schmullo, take them out. Oh, and we thought we lived in a democracy. You live in a democracy until it gets to the point where it's inconvenient for the Australian Banking Association. And nobody stands up to them. Why? They're scared. I'll do it. Give me the chance and I will lash them. So we need change. And I think that if you have people in Parliament who will demonstrate the old way of doing things is not on, the old way of doing things can be changed, there are alternatives, then it puts the Liberal Party and the Diet Liberal Party under pressure. Well, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you resisting your corporate donors? Why aren't you making change? If I manage to get into the Senate, there are enough people in the Senate that I can work with because I've worked with them already. Andrew Bragg from the Liberal Party, Deborah O'Neill from the Labour Party, Nick McKim, Barbara Pocock from the Greens, Wish Wilson from the Greens, David Pocock, Independent, Malcolm Roberts if need be, you name it. If you have enough independence in the Senate, you hold the balance of power. Government doesn't control the Senate. The government doesn't have the numbers in the Senate, which means it can't pass legislation without doing deals in the Senate. So you put together a coalition and you say to them, you're not going to get any legislation passed for the next 3 years unless you accede to our demands. You can call it anything you like if you want to. You can call it holding you to ransom. Couldn't care less. Your dogs who've betrayed your constituents anyway, so really insulting me means nothing. You can call it holding you to ransom, you can call it frank, it doesn't matter. Here's the deal. Here are the following Senate inquiries. Financial Accountability Regime Act. The legislation to hold bank executives for defrauding their customers, hold them liable. Bank branch closure inquiry. Our banks owe the people of Australia branches. ASIC inquiry. The government owes the people of Australia a regulator who will protect them when they are screwed by their super company or their bank. The PwC inquiry. The government must implement the recommendations of the PwC inquiry because it's not good enough that we're spending $21 billion in 5 years on a bunch of louche grifter consultants. Louche grifter consultants. Let me tell you, PwC, this is just one example. They produced a PowerPoint presentation. Do you all know what PowerPoint is? They produced a PowerPoint presentation with 8 slides, and they charged Robodebt $1 million for that. Now, $1 million is not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but I just want to point this out to you. $1 million for 8 slides. That's $125,000 per slide. Take you 5 minutes to put a slide together, right? $125,000 per slide. What was on the slides that made them worth $125,000? Was it the GPS coordinates for the whereabouts of Harold Holt, Amelia Earhart, and Elvis? What incredible secrets are on the slides? And the Robodebt inquiry said to PwC, not only did you charge $1 million for these slides, you knew Robodebt was illegal. They knew they were charging $1 million for work they hadn't done to a scheme that was illegal. These guys are scum. Scum in suits. So, ASIC inquiry, financial accountability regime, PwC, bank branch closures, supermarkets, airline passenger rights. I was asked to make a submission to the airline passenger rights inquiry. Some crooked little shyster by the name of Svensson, I think his name is. He's the CEO of the retail arm of Qantas. He went before the airline inquiry and he said, oh, here's evidence that the passenger rights bill in Europe hasn't worked. It hasn't achieved anything. I went before the inquiry and I said, really, that's interesting. I note the data that he's citing is 2018. Why would you cite data that's 7 years old when there's data from 2023? Why would you cherry pick data that's 7 years old? Second of all, there is data to show not only has it worked, but it has saved, in terms of flights being on time and encouraging flights on time, it's saved in Europe something like the equivalent of 9,200 years in man hours. So what's this about it doesn't work? Like it's working staggeringly well in Europe. That's why their flights are now on time, right? So the airline inquiry, and you say to the government, these are the Senate and parliamentary inquiries that have handed down recommendations. When you have enacted all of them, then this balance of power group will give you assent to your legislation. Until then, you are dead in the water. So deal with it, boys. What's so hard about that? I've probably said enough. Thank you so much.
Okay, excellent. So get that around. Now, we also had a breakthrough in the mainstream media coverage, or at least a little one, at a high profile one, in the Australian Financial Review on Easter Sunday. There's an excellent article. We'll put the digital screenshot up because, you know, beautiful picture in front of the city and, you know, great layout, page coverage and, you know, detailed article. I'll quote a few excerpts, but then we'll put up this picture as well because this is the print edition which came out on Tuesday, the day of our campaign launch.
That was great. This particular journalist, James Ayres, did an interview with Andy and wanted to run this article, but I was a bit disappointed at first because not with the article's good, but with the fact that it was on Easter Sunday and you think who's going to be watching on Easter Sunday? But then they actually held it over for the print edition on the Tuesday, so that was in the paper on the same day. And even though the Financial Review is not read by everybody in Australia, it is read by the people that we want Andy to terrify. All the elite, the corporate elite in Australia read the Financial Review and they got served up this saying he's coming to get you.
Yeah, and I'm just going to quote from it, but just to note that you were telling us this morning that there's AFR put out a note to their subscribers called Professional Life, and it said just what you just said. It literally said they had a link to the article and whatnot, and it said, you know, it's no secret who the consultant firms are barracking against at the coming election, you know, referring to Andy.
Yeah, PwC's not going to be out there handing a head of vote cards for Andy Schmulo.
Certainly not. But yeah, in the article itself, they start out saying Andy Schmulo is fired up. His gripe, companies are too big and too powerful. So much so, they're threatening democracy's foundations, corrupting politicians and bureaucrats with excessive lobbying and generous donations. The legal, academic and corporate provocateur is challenging his anger by running for the Senate in the upcoming federal election. And then it talks about how he laments legislators captured by lobby groups like the Australian Banking Association and Financial Services Council and the revolving door between Treasury and the banks. Goes on to say he would thrive grilling chief executives and regulators and committees he thinks are far too soft. He reckons parliamentary committees don't go hard or deep enough, allowing chief executives to duck and weave. The public wants to see accountability and parliamentarians asking the hard questions and not giving up and not giving in. You have to be on the front foot the whole time. And that's just a taste of, you know, a much longer article.
Yep.
And he did also get a brief amount of coverage in the AFR on another occasion after he fronted up at the AMP AGM. We showed a clip of that on last week's show. Definitely go and watch that if you haven't seen it. So Rear Window actually covered his role briefly at that event as well.
Yep.
So he's kind of caught their attention.
Yep.
It's difficult not to when you have this kind of presence that you're bringing to the table. Now, briefly, while we're talking about that kind of financial unaccountability, we last week we briefly mentioned that we had an event out the front of a court hearing for the Sterling First survivors in Western Australia. These are the people that had their life savings stolen and their livelihoods stolen by a scam that ASIC allowed to occur.
And the WA government.
And the WA government, and as we said, we were holding a press conference out the front of that event, and there were 3 or 4 prominent media that showed up at that.
Yep.
We did end up getting some good coverage.
Well, the press conference was led by our WA Senate candidate, Aisha Novakovic, who is a lawyer, and she's very impressive. She's an excellent candidate for the Citizens Party. So she held a press conference to highlight the fact that the Labor Party had promised the Sterling survivors in April 2022, weeks before the last election, that if it got elected, it would make sure they got included in the compensation scheme of last resort. And then when they got elected, they didn't. They broke the promise. And so Aisha's message was, Labor has betrayed the Sterling survivors. The Citizens Party will continue to fight for full and immediate compensation for them, because I often contrast the fact that this government is so infuriating. They say that, oh, no, we can't really just go and, write out an $8.5 million cheque to stop 130 elderly people from being homeless for the final years of their lives. We can't do that. But when it comes to 2 Liberal staffers in the Morrison government, one of them had an affair with a government minister, and then the other one was Brittany Higgins. And not to comment on either of those cases, but because those cases were politically inconvenient to the Morrison government and expedient to the Albanese government, $750,000 in compensation for one, $2 million in compensation for the other, like that, right? And so they can compensate these victims if they had the slightest skerrick of morality. This is what Aisha had to say in front of
this is on Channel 10.
Channel 10 covered Aisha's press conference.
Victims of the Sterling First Lease for Life scheme have turned up to the Supreme Court only to see justice delayed again. 6 years after the company collapsed, the case against 3 co-accused Sterling First promoters was once more adjourned. Sterling First ran a rental investment scheme for mostly retirees who were deceived into giving up their lifetime assets. But when the company collapsed, many elderly people were left homeless.
ASIC has let them down. The Labor government has let them down. The WA state has let them down.
We've been waiting almost 6 years now for some redress, some solution.
The victims have never been compensated.
All right, and there's, so many other cases where people have, had their lives destroyed. From financial scams of a similar kind.
And the Citizens Party's policy is we're not just going to reform the banks and draw a line there and say, okay, we're going to do better going forward. No, there's 25 to 30 years of bank and financial atrocities that's left tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Australian families ruined. And those banks have been able to go on making bigger and bigger profits every year. And so that all has to be looked at. We need to set up a commission that looks at the whole thing, and the government should facilitate this process by, if necessary, the government provide the compensation immediately in each case and have a massive levy on the banks to get them to pay the government back for that compensation. And if that means for 10 years or so, bank profits are reduced, right, so that covers the compensation, so be it.
Yep. So let's send a missile into Canberra to deal with it, get the word out.
Yep.
All right, next topic. The Russians are coming. Not. Now, on 14th April, there were reports in US military news service Janes, which people would have no doubt heard about in the media, alleging or stating as a matter of fact pretty much that the Russians had requested of the Indonesian government that they could use a air base in the Manuhua Air Force Base, just in the north of Papua. And this was, very, very quickly demolished as disinformation. There was actually no prospect of Russia having that base and no evidence that it was ever even requested or proposed. The Indonesian government said outright it had never had such a request. The Indonesian constitution, the government made very clear, forbids foreign military bases, so it wasn't ever even a prospect. They have only ever allowed ad hoc visits by military aircraft in the case of Russia and various other examples, and they're peaceful visits or essentially just stopovers in transit. Richard Marles spoke to his counterpart fairly quickly and confirmed that this was completely untrue. But of course that didn't stop actually both sides jumping on it and running with it, particularly Peter Dutton, who immediately denounced this as a destabilising Russian presence in Southeast Asia and in our region. And Albanese echoed him fairly quickly too, saying, of all things, he said, I am anti-Russia. They have different values to us. I mean,
Yes.
just a real blanket statement. I'm anti-Russia.
Russians are orcs who are formed out of the dirt in the centre of the earth, like in Lord of the Rings, and they eat their babies and they eat your babies. They're not really humans. They don't love their families. They don't want a decent life for themselves, their offspring. They killed 27 million of their fellow human beings in World War II for the hell of it against the Nazis, because they just like dying in wars.
They don't have principles to fight against the Nazis.
And every story you've ever been told about the Russians is by definition true, because they have to be, because they're the biggest monsters in the history of the world, and that's what Anthony Albanese knows, and don't dare question it.
And meanwhile, I should say that they're picking on their second favourite target, because
That's right.
the only reason they're not picking on China is because they can't alienate the Chinese vote, and they've got all the trade factors to think about, because in terms of Russia, we virtually have no trade with them because of all the sanctions we've cut most of it off.
They get away with this kind of just completely cheap demonisation of Russia.
Yeah.
Whereas
it's not a big voting bloc
there are
in
people
Australia.
that have been there are people that were trying to do that here about the Chinese with lies like live organ harvesting and anything you hear. Here's a word of advice for viewers. If you hear any claim about any country, literally any country, where the essence of that claim is the people in that country must be utter monsters to do what they're doing, look deeper, please, because that's just how wartime propaganda works, and it's never true in the way it's presented to you.
Now, the Russian ambassador to Indonesia, Sergei Tokanov, had a very good response. He said, look, Australia is destabilising the region, not Indonesia, by hosting AUKUS nuclear submarines and intermediate range missiles by this whole flank that they've pushed. He said the leaders of the two main political parties are trying to outdo each other, heating up the situation. They stop at nothing, and the time has come to play the so-called Russia card.
Yeah, Lisa, when he said that, by the way, you could say, oh, that's the Russian ambassador, that's a self-serving comment. He's actually echoing the Indonesians. As soon as AUKUS was announced, the first complaint came from our closest neighbour, Indonesia, who said, do you realise what you've done here? You're going to have nuclear-powered submarines in your country. You tell us they're only nuclear-powered but not nuclear-armed, but you're not going to let us come in and inspect them to confirm that. So we have to assume that they may be nuclear-armed, and if they're because we can't. You think we're going to trust you, right? Indonesia didn't go join the coalition of the willing to invade Iraq on a lie. We did. We are the liars on the world stage. We are the baddies on so much of this stuff. Indonesia hasn't participated in 100 invasions around the world in a century. We have. We have. They have no grounds to trust us at all. So we've gone and put these nuclear submarines here that could be nuclear armed submarines, and the Indonesians have said, you've just destabilised the region and started what's going to be an arms race, and they said that 2 years ago. That's what the Russian ambassador was echoing. And on top of this, a quick aside here, Michael West Media just the other day published an article that I first heard from Aisha Novakovic, a story, because Aisha is Indonesian born. Indonesia is the country we should have the closest security relationship with because it's so important, right? We treat them like dirt, including down to the level we don't even allow Indonesians to come here and visit. It's so hard if you're an Indonesian to get a visa to come to Australia. We make it almost impossible. We treat them like utter garbage. And then we say, oh, why do they have a good relationship with the Russians?
Yeah. I mean, you know, Indonesia invited all of its international partners to join a new space research and innovation agency that they've just launched. And the only country that took it up was Russia. So Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, is working with the Indonesians to build a satellite launch facility at the same base that supposedly they're stationing Russian bombers at.
And I don't want the viewer to gloss over something, a detail you said a little bit earlier. The Indonesia's constitution says it cannot have foreign military bases. Do you know what a saviour that is for our country to know that?
Yeah.
Well, I was brought up. I got into politics when I was young. I was a late teenager in uni, and one of the things at the time in Queensland, I was reading publications that were trying to tell me that the Indonesians were about to invade. Now, at the time, I didn't know whether that was true or not. It was designed to make young men like me feel very afraid. The Indonesians are about to invade. That's one of the reasons I'm so hard on this propaganda now, because I fell for it at the time, right? And there's never been a skerrick of evidence of this stuff, ever. Now you find out the Indonesian constitution says we can't have foreign military bases here.
Yeah, and not to mention that the famous Bandung movement was started 70 years ago this month in Indonesia, setting up the non-aligned movement for peace. So Indonesia, you know, is proudly a non-aligned country. And
that non-aligned movement was so important at stopping the Cold War turning into a hot war.
And Indonesia has a number of people, I'll report on this next week, that spoke at a number of events celebrating that 70th anniversary. Where some of their spokespeople were saying, because Indonesia is now a full member of the BRICS as of January, it's just in the last month or so it is joining the new development bank, which is the multilateral development bank of the BRICS. And some of their representatives at these conferences were saying, look, you know, the BRICS is leading the new non-aligned movement, but this is something that Australia takes as a threat because we're part of the Anglo-American.
And it's why when Dutton was pressed, because he just ran off with this thing because he's an idiot and desperate for a national security element for the campaign, the only thing he could fall back on was pointing out that Indonesia is a member of the BRICS, because the BRICS is the threat.
Yeah, no. And talking about Dutton, I just wanted to hone in a bit more on the danger of Dutton when it comes to the, you know, whipping up these kind of security threats. And this is the other side to the top-down financial control that we always talk about, of, you know, a small number of agencies having control globally, and they have, you know, there are decisions are made globally, they have global reach. Well, this is the same thing that Dutton is always pushing, because he's very close. His alter ego, we would say, is Mike Pezzullo. And he's the disgraced public servant who was in Defence, the Secretary of Defence and Home Affairs departments at various times through various governments. He's this guy that's always there behind the scenes pointing us in this war direction. And he's been revived recently. He's come into the Aspie circles and so forth to run these kind of propaganda charges.
And can I say quickly, we call him the alter ego because all through Dutton's career as a minister, Pezzullo has been his main department secretary. Immigration, Home Affairs and Defence. Now, in the 2022 election, viewers will probably remember, this was a real khaki election. And Dutton was out there every day beating the drums of war, right? And it blew up in his face. The Liberals lost. And the Albanese government said, to their credit, we're going to stabilise the relationship with China, and it's worked. But September 2022, I was invited to go and have dinner with the Chinese ambassador to Australia. And the Chinese embassy had put on events that no parliamentarian came to in Canberra, because all the guys in the building were so terrified to be seen to be doing something the United States government wouldn't approve of, right? I would be the only political person there because we're not afraid of the United States. So I got this dinner invitation, and I took the former New Zealand Associate Foreign Minister Matt Robson with me, and it was a good dinner, and we talked about high-speed rail. And the ambassador, who had just come from Indonesia, actually, he'd been the ambassador in Indonesia, and he helped them build their high-speed rail line. And he also said to me, look, Australia should be doing more of its own manufacturing here. You guys have all the lithium in the world. If you've got the lithium, you should make the batteries here. We can help you do that. And I thought this would be great, the Australian public realising that here's China offering to help Australia with our own manufacturing here instead of, because Australians think, China steals our manufacturing. But I was very conscious at the dinner, Elisa, that this was going to be controversial. That, there's a political party having dinner with the embassy. 2 weeks later, Peter Dutton goes and has a meeting with the ambassador. And that was the beginning of him going on this charm offensive to try and suck up to the Chinese voters, because they lost, 70% of Chinese voters used to vote for the Liberals, and in that election, 60% voted Labor. And Dutton, for 3 years, has been trying to pretend he's not this warmongering thug, right? And to a point, he's got away with it. But we were saying all along, don't believe a word out of his mouth, because his alter ego is this guy, Mike Pizzullo. Yeah. And what Mike Pizzullo is saying is the real Peter Dutton.
Yeah, so Pizzullo, and he became infamous for talking about the drums of war a few years ago, but you've seen him slide in whenever there's a war danger, or in some cases big terrorist threats, which we've seen over decades. So for instance, in 2018 he made a speech at a Washington summit on the subject of various terrorist threats that were occurring at that time, and he came in talking about how we need to have a transnational model of security, where we have to have global agencies that collaborate and set aside our national sovereignty. He basically had this whole speech about how national sovereignty just gets in the way of us dealing with this stuff. And more recently, this idea has been described as, quote, pooling sovereignty. This is the sort of thing he talks about.
These people are traitors.
Yeah, he talks about, this is an idea, and his idea, he's the guy, Pizzullo's the guy who pushed the Home Affairs Super Agency, which we copied from the UK under Malcolm Turnbull. But they also copied this idea of the fusion doctrine, where all government agencies have to act under the imprimatur of defence and security supervision. So even economic decisions, finance ministry, treasury decisions, all have to come under review by security agencies. The AFR had an article in June 2024, so nearly a year ago, which talked about some updates on this front, titled Why Our Spooks and Economists Are Teaming Up to Manage China. So that was specifically, honing in on the China issue. But they talked about the Office of National Intelligence Director, and the Office of National Intelligence, where they have these umbrella agencies over all the spy agencies, was another Pizzullo idea that he pushed. But Director General of that agency, Andrew Shearer, and Treasury Secretary Stephen Kennedy, so the spies and the economic people, they talked about the behind-the-scenes power these guys are wielding, saying they're working intensively together in this secret Canberra facility where they have to have facial scans before they even enter the building. And they're meeting more than any of their predecessors have ever done to manage the economy and security, particularly vis-a-vis China. And this article talked about how this is establishing an industrial policy complex. They talked about how they've managed to break down the silos in bureaucracy so that they can create this new top-down force, which echoes, by the way, an article that came out, and there was a lot of discussion about this at the time in 2019, which was about Morrison's network of influence, where he brought, as soon as he was elected, he brought this whole cast of characters, including some of these people named like Kennedy and Shearer, etc., to restructure government departments, abolish certain government departments, and bring into these government structures all of his mates and network of influence to reshape, as the headline said, Australia's national security, or not the headline, but a line in the article which said, Morrison has moved to reshape Australia's national security architecture led by Pizzulo. So if Dutton gets back in, this is going to be supercharged.
And the bad news is it's still there now. Like,
yes,
you know, he
that's
will
right.
just fire it up more. What you've just described, starting with Morrison, but a lot of this would have continued with Albanese, and Dutton will fire it up more, is a coup. It's a takeover of government by people preparing for war.
Yes.
That's what you're describing. And these people, Elisa, are traitors. They have subjugated our economy to this agenda, and to the point where part of it now, because Trump is this loose cannon, they don't know if the American side of it's reliable, that they're prepared to suck up to him with a strategic rare earths reserve and give him our superannuation, our $4 trillion superannuation fund to make America great again. These people are traitors to our country. And Dutton has let it all hang out with this announcement that if he got elected, he would bring the arch architect, Mike Pizzulo, back.
Proudly.
Exactly. But that's not to let Albanese off the hook, because Albanese knows, what I would say about Albanese, he would know that this is not a good scenario, but he's such a weak, cowardly politician. The only reason he's likely going to get re-elected, but only because Dutton is such a one-dimensional thug.
And Elbow dealt him back into the game because he was
did.
so weak and pathetic. So unfortunately, it became a real option. But yeah, we're talking about this process is subverting elected government, exactly as we said at the start, which the Pope essentially said. So you've got the economic side, which we'll send in Andy, and then you've got the security war side, and you can be that missile.
And we will, as the luncheon at Chatswood was about, it's called the Cancel AUKUS lunch. And we're gonna put our efforts after the election behind. There is already discussion of an inquiry into AUKUS. We need an AUKUS inquiry. Hopefully there's a bigger crossbench than ever that can force one side or the other to join with them to have that inquiry, cancel this AUKUS contract, right? Free Australia from that and start the process of getting our independence back as a country.
Yep. So if you can't vote for us where you live, vote for other independents or like-minded people. And if you're not sure who they are, call them up and ask them.
Unless you're a public servant in Canberra, you can vote for us everywhere in the Senate. And that means number 1 in the Citizens Party box above the line, number 5 more boxes, so it's 6 boxes in total, and choose which ones you want, but number 1 above the line. We'll put the link below where we've got some advice on voting on our website.
Yes, and please give us a call if you can help more or to get more information. But yeah, get
and
involved.
one last thing, sorry. And if you can volunteer in electorates like Riverina, Corwell here in Victoria, or even in Perth for our Senate campaign over there in
Brisbane,
Fremantle,
in
Morton in Brisbane.
So the lower house seats.
If you on polling day or even pre-poll, because it's huge, if you can come and hand out how to vote cards for a little while, contact us to volunteer your time. We'll put you in charge with those candidates. In touch with those candidates.
Yes, thank you. All right, that's the show for this week. Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks, Lisa.
And see you again next week.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.